Usually my intros consist of me describing the topic of the video and my very general opinions regarding it, but today's topic is women, so, you know, they're alright, I guess. Up until a few centuries ago in literature, you had the wife, the whore, and the butch, and that was really it. Super shallow and uninteresting characters that only the most esteemed writers could pull off. Though of course, I would say especially in the early 1900s with writers such as James Joyce, female characters finally started to become equals in terms of quality with men. Which is obviously great, but I think that movies are still trying to catch up to literature in that regard. Because this video isn't about stupid, boring books for nerds, we're talking about epic movies here. And in general, I'm relatively pleased with the progression of how female characters are being written. As a fan of film, why would I want to see anything other than an incredible and engaging character? The problem with most people's strong female characters is that they end up being written as, in essence, just that, a strong female character, when what should be being aimed for is a strong character who happens to be female. For the sake of clarity, I'm going to go over some good and awful examples, detailing exactly why they work or fail horrifically. So to start off with, Mrs. Gump from Forrest Gump, which I know is slightly cheating because it was a book first, but I'm looking at the screenplay adaptation here and it's my video, so whatever, is the epitome of a strong female character, and reminds me a lot of Cinderella. Yes, conventionally in terms of physical strength, tomboyish quirks, and manliness, these two characters aren't exactly the most powerful. However, and this is something that genuinely pisses me off, so many people fail to look at Cinderella. I mean seriously, stop and think about this character. A character who was abused for a majority of her lifetime, still manages to stand strong and fight for herself well into adulthood. Even if it's not necessarily physically, it's terribly impressive, both character-wise and writing-wise. And in that same right, Mrs. Gump is another character completely slighted in life. A single mother in the 1950s whose character isn't purely based on a boringly explained patriarchal system, a trap that so many pretentious writers fall victim to. So that's already something worth mentioning, but on top of that, has a handicapped child who is not the brightest, but despite all these hardships, much like Cinderella, manages to stay positive, fight through and get the happy ending, dying a noble death and devoting even her final breaths to building up her beaten down son, with a smile on her face. It's characters like this who I consider to be the strongest in all forms of media. Strength comes in different ways and there's nothing wrong with being feminine. In fact, I wish there were more male characters with these characteristics. It's very annoying that Cinderella tends to be overlooked purely for not being able to swing a sword around or beat up a big fire thing. Characters, particularly Disney characters, are sometimes lazily written deliberately to be sword-wielding badass superpower women, which is a great segue to an awfully bad example of female character writing. Frozen has zero impressive female leads. Elsa is by far the worst offender, suffering from a dire case of zero personality. Yes, she's physically a force to be reckoned with, she can perform feats of strength that people like Cinderella can't, but she's pathetic and weak and runs away from her responsibilities and neglects her family, and is just an awful fucking person. And she's shit at music. Anna isn't as bad, but her flaws are more based on her femininity, whilst Elsa's flaws are pretty general in terms of characterization. Initially when I watched Frozen, having known the prince was a villain because it was the most obvious thing in the world, I was really excited to see where Anna's character was going. It had essentially written itself. She would go on this journey constantly thinking about Prince Hans, only for him to betray her, and for her to realize that her happiness is not dependent on a man, and that she can absolutely live by her own morals and experiences. But no, she just meets another man and pretty much gets with him instead. Lame. In the same vein as Elsa, we've got Wonder Woman and Captain Marvel, who are similarly boring and uninteresting. These are characters who wouldn't be any different in terms of quality if they were a man. They're just badly written in general. Utter shit in spite of their gender. Though if you want an example of a character who is spectacular in spite of their gender, look no further than... Ellen Ripley from Alien, a movie notoriously written with no actor for the main role in mind, thereby making the character's gender completely irrelevant. Susan Weaver just so happened to be the woman for the role, and sure enough, she was fucking perfect, and no doubt contributed to the insane influence this film had, but due to the obscure writing process, isn't acknowledged by any other character in a way that would imply a certain gender. Everybody just treats her as part of the team. This one goes to show a great method of character writing, where one's gender remains irrelevant. There's an infinite number of ways to write great women, and this is just one of them, though obviously it takes a good script. And who knows what this character would have been if the writers felt the need to rush her character's development. One woman who did just that was Rey from the New Age Star Wars trilogy. Now, Star Wars is a franchise for a whole other day, but to focus on Rey for a second, a truly disappointing character. One who in The Force Awakens is written intelligently, confidently, inexperienced yet still capable, and for the majority of Episode 7 does a great job engaging and interesting the audience. She was really captivating and acted brilliantly, a faithful and tasteful sketch of A New Hope. However, the differences between Luke and Rey begin here. Rey's weakness as a character doesn't stem from her femininity, and Luke's strength as a character doesn't come from his masculinity. It's purely a case of bad writing. Rey becomes incredibly rushed and we don't really get to experience her struggles and training as a Jedi as we did with Luke. Now this is only relevant to the video because it's certainly possible that this decision was made in an attempt to pander to audiences with a strong female character, but they forgot to actually write a good character. You actually need good writers and a director who is willing to take their time, and if you think that's ridiculous and that Disney would never do that, this trilogy isn't a stranger to shameless pandering. Episode 9, for example, contained a brief moment of two women kissing. It was brief enough to steal the praise from general audiences, but subtle enough to censor for the homophobic countries and Chinese screenings. Fucking cowardly cunts. Fuck off, Disney. This isn't a traditional movie. There's 3 guaranteed episodes, so act like it. Sorry, I'm going off track. Star Wars video will come one day. There's also something to be said about women who are tossed aside in favor of a male protagonist, and how many of them tend to be treated. Usually they're love interests. A horrible example of a love interest is Mary Jane from the original Spider-Man trilogy. The worst part of those films, she is abysmal and whores out and is super annoying. But these things aren't treated as bad within the script. When she makes out with pretty much every male character, she's still portrayed as the moral one when Peter so much as dances with another girl. The audience is basically begged to feel sympathy for an awful person.
21.
Speaking of whoring out, Gloria from Madagascar is an annoying whore, whose lines consist only of men and ogling men and having sex with men, much like Anna, connoting complete dependence and an inability to hold one's own weight. And there's also weird close-ups on her ass and stuff all the time, though I won't go too in-depth because Madagascar video coming soon. But it does bring up the strange issue of sexualizing animated animals. Perhaps the most notorious example of this is Lola Bunny from Space Jam, who is the quintessential example of the importance of female character design. Now, it's very difficult to talk about this character without being perceived as sexualizing an animated bunny, so just be fucking adult for a minute and hear me out. Her design is interesting to look at and it's animated very impressively in the original Space Jam, especially for the time. And whilst her character at its core is a simple love interest, at least she had a character. In the god-awful sequel, she looked like shit. And I'm not talking about her tits being smaller. I mean, her design as a whole is horrendously ugly and boring to look at. They went too far the other way. And this time she has no character, not even something as simple as a love interest. Let's rewind for a moment and take it back to Mrs. Gump, because on top of being a fantastic woman, she also happens to be a fantastic mother, and the mother archetype is one that can be written in many different ways. One of these ways is the bride from Kill Bill approach. If you're a fan of film, I'm sure you heard of the channel Now You See It, who produced their own video on this similar topic, claiming that
the bride does not act gender neutral, she acts in a masculine way.
But I disagree. In my opinion, she's a very extreme example of the quintessential mother archetype, presented as a threatening and caring mama bear, who is simply written differently to most grieving mothers, one who stops at nothing to enact her revenge for the death of her unborn child, and a wonderful character. It would be tough, however, to say that this is a realistic interpretation of a mother. If that's what you're looking for, then look no further than Greta Gerwig's Lady Bird, renowned as possibly the most accurate representation of a mother-daughter relationship ever written.
I didn't know if you were tired.
You were being passive-aggressive.
No, I wasn't.
You are so infuriating.
Please stop yelling.
I'm not yelling. Oh, it's perfect.
I love it.
Though I won't go too in-depth because this movie is analysed brilliantly by the aforementioned video, and I don't have much more to add to the conversation. Now You See It also mentions that
there's no wrong way to write women,
which I think is the most wrong part about that video. There is no one right way to craft a great girl character, but there are plenty of wrong ways, as I'm sure I've proven throughout this entire video. Women don't need to be emotionless to be strong, they don't need to be humorless to be mature, they don't need to be flawless to be reliable, they don't have to isolate themselves and refuse help help to be independent, they don't have to be role models to be main characters, they don't have to talk about how subversive they are or how oppressed they are under the patriarchy, and they don't have to know how to fight to be part of the story. One thing I also feel obligated to clarify is that a woman doesn't need to fundamentally be a good and moral person in order to be a great character. And there's one show that I will be devoting an entire video towards that perfectly demonstrates this.
Kneel. Just kneel.